Okay.
Joe, what's new? What's on the docket? Anything? Any exciting, interesting trials coming
Yeah,
up?
just gang murders. That's about it. The feds aren't doing anything right now, so there's really nothing happening at 219 South Dearborn.
No. Which for some people is a good thing.
Yeah, I would think so.
Joe, as you probably remember, I
Are
started
we
out as
starting?
I was a court buff. I
Yeah.
going back to the early 1990s. I was very lucky to attend some of the biggest federal trials in Chicago. Going back to the early 1990s all the way to 2000s, and I actually seen you in court. Several times,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a great honor for me to not only meet you, become your friend, but to get you on the show. I know you got a lot of very interesting stories to tell. Before we get into it, Joe, you want to give everybody just a brief background of your history and where you went to school and everything?
Well, I went to IIT, Chicago Kent College of Law. Got out in '83 and started practicing in '84. So I've been doing it since 1984. I've been around a while. I've done all kinds of different cases, but mostly criminal cases seem to be the thing that I was able to gravitate toward and liked a lot. So I kind of stuck in this business.
How long have you been practicing law now?
It's 1984.
Oh, okay. And you're still working, right?
Every day.
Yeah, nice. Let's get right into it, Joe. I want to talk about the second trial that I went to. I think it was in 1992, 1993. I want to talk about the Sam Carlisi trial, how you got involved in this case, what it was like, sitting in that courtroom with some of the heavyweights. And let's talk about that briefly, if you can.
Well, yeah, that case that was a pretty big case. It wasn't my first mob case, but it was a pretty big case. It was probably the biggest one that I had done to date in that particular case. I wasn't really known in that circle too much. I was a drug lawyer. Everybody knew I was a cocaine lawyer, and that was where I made my bones with the cartel, the Cali cartel, and the Mexican cartels. I made my bones in narcotics. I did narcotics for a number of years. Lots of narcotics cases in the federal building. Became kind of a specialist at white powder law, I would call it. So I was doing a lot of white powder law, but I was winning cases, which made me different than most other attorneys. So around 1992 or 1993, I can't remember the exact year, I did get a call. And I was told that there was a client down in the federal building by the name of Anthony Chiramonte. I didn't know who he was at the time.
Yeah.
I was told he was there, that he had a preliminary hearing set in the afternoon, and they wanted me there. Who's they? I don't know, but I was directed to go to the courtroom. So I went to the courtroom. I remember I was late. I walked in and everybody was kind of staring at me. There was Sam sneering at me, Carlisi. I didn't know who he was. And he's the man in the glasses there on the lower right. Anthony Zizzo's next to him. And there were some really heavyweight ex-U.S. attorney lawyers that were present at that hearing. You had people from Jenner and Block and other large white-collar law firms. They were there. It seemed that my client was the main attraction from what I was gathering as I sat down. I remember I came in, I still had a ponytail. I think I sent you a picture of one of my old court sketches with the ponytail.
Yeah, this one here, look at that.
There you go. So that was me. I walked in, I was all dressed in black, my signature look at the time, and I had this ponytail, and Sam was sneering at me, and everyone was like, who the hell is this guy?
Yeah.
And I remember hearing somebody tell him, look, this guy's a winner. This guy knows what he's doing. Just relax. They didn't know who I was. They had no clue who I was, because all of the cases that I had done were narcotics cases, other than another case I had done earlier, which was Ed Pedotti. But that wasn't in play at the time. And I sat down and everyone looked at me, and it became my turn to cross-examine, and I got up there and started ripping this agent a new a-hole, so to speak.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, everybody's smiling at me. And Sam's got this look on his face. He's like, whoa, where'd this guy come from? And lawyers are handing me questions to ask. Other lawyers are handing me questions. Ask this question, ask this question. I'm asking questions like left and right. And that's kind of how I got into the case. Sam's like, man, you did a great job. I don't like that ponytail though. So as we went along, it was suggested that, maybe those days are over, which they were kind of, because it was now the 90s.
Yeah.
I did cut my ponytail off and I continued on with my representation of Mr. Chiaramonte, but that's kind of how I got into the case. To this day, I don't know who called me. I mean, another lawyer called me and told me to go, but I don't know who called him for me to go. But somebody was out there who knew who I was, wanted me to be in that building at the time. And that's kind of how I got in the case.
Interesting. Joe, I remember one of the times we've talked, you told me that the hatch was pretty difficult to control. You want to just elaborate on what Tony Chiaramonte was like for people that don't know him?
He was just a difficult. He was used to getting his way all the time and bossing people around, basically. So he didn't. He was just he was just a very difficult person. He was that kind of type of. He was just that type of person. Whether it was in the legal community or if we all worked at Portillo's, he'd be the same way. That was just kind of his personality. That he was kind of a bitch, I guess you would say, right? Yeah. And now they call him, he was kind of like a bitch. But I mean, he was a man of respect. There's no question about that. Yeah. And he was difficult at times, and he would see things through his lens, and it didn't match my lens, and we would get in arguments about it. But we always got along. I always got along with all my clients, no matter how bad they were. Yeah. And I've had some really bad ones, and I didn't have any real difficulty with them. And he came out the best of anybody in the whole case. I mean, he got the least amount of time. I vacated his $30,000 fine, and he still complained. So that's just the type of person he was.
Interesting. And all those defendants were found guilty, right?
All of them, yeah.
Now, this photo here of you in the ponytail with Judge Ann Williams.
Judge Ann Williams.
I remember real quick. I don't know how I got invited, but I got invited along with other court buffs to a Christmas party that she actually had at the Dirksen Federal Building. It was more like a luncheon. And I also remember her, I'll never forget it, when she sentenced Rocky and Felice. I did not go to the Good Ship Lollipop trial, but I attended Rocky's sentencing. And I remember Rocky was kind of pleading with her, hey, I'm a World War II paratrooper. I fought against one of Hitler's toughest regimes. Cut me some slack, but she basically buried him. What was she like, though? And what were some of your favorite judges at the building?
Well, she was tough. I mean, she was an ex-U.S. attorney, so what do you expect, right? Once a prosecutor, always a prosecutor, was what Lou Carbonaro taught me when I was a young lawyer. And she was a very, very tough. I mean, I had the German in front of her on resentencing, so I know how I tried to, that case that I have that drawing of, that's the USA versus Vladimir Sedano case. Very famous case in legal circles, because in that case, I beat the conspiracy count, and he was found guilty of 1 kilo, but the judge sentenced him for all the other kilograms he was found not guilty of, and it got affirmed on appeal. And it made a new law that you can beat the case. They can still use the evidence against you at sentencing because it's not a trial. So it's a very famous case. Mm-hmm. She was a nice person. I can say that she was just very, very strict.
Yeah. Joe, let's talk about you. You touched on it a little bit, and I actually was very fortunate to meet this gentleman. I used to hang out with some of the guys at the hardware store on Grand Avenue. Tell me about the Mikey Switek and the Eddie Pedot trial. I was not familiar with that trial, but I know what happened to Mike. Can we talk about that briefly?
Yeah, so that was my first federal case, actually. I came into that case. I was only a lawyer for 2 years when I came into that case. I remember Big Mike Monaco, was representing Eddie at the time, and he was kind of perplexed, like, who is this guy? But I got into the case through a family member, and I tried the case, and there were some big names in it. Sam Adam was in it, Elliot Price, Ralph Meachak, Sandy Volpe, who was, and Glenn Seiden, who were very well known, very good trial lawyers, both of them. And they've been around. And Volpe was really tied in with the guys a lot. And that was the first case that I did, and I learned a lot on that case. I was very green. I was very fresh out of law school to be handling a case like that, to be honest with you.
Great experience.
It was a great experience, and I always remember Sandy Volpe telling me, "Hey, kid, what you lack in courtroom experience, you got in balls, because I can't believe you're here." And I held my own. Nobody ever yelled at me that you made a mistake or why did you do that. I held my own during the trial, and I kind of made my bones in that particular case in the federal building because I was able to withstand the pressure that case came with. I think I'm trying to remember who the prosecutors were. One of them was I can't remember his name, but Mark Vogel.
Yeah.
Mark Vogel, and he was a tenacious prosecutor. And I can't remember who the other prosecutors, but it was no cakewalk. It was a very tough case.
Yeah. And if I remember, didn't Mike get caught selling arsenal to undercover agents?
He sold a bomb or something, if I remember correctly.
Wow.
Because what happened in that case was Eddie was a jeweler at 5 South Wabash, and they had decided they were going to rob this other jeweler of like $1 million worth of gold. Back then, 1985, that's a lot of money, or 84,
sure.
whenever it occurred. And unfortunately, Eddie Pedotti, my client, recruited an undercover ATF agent and brought the whole crew down. So Mikey Switek got indicted in that case. Danny Bamboulas got indicted in that case. And all three of us went to trial in that case.
Mm-hmm. And Mikey got buried, right? What did he get, 20 years?
He got 20. I believe he got 20. He got a big sentence, but it wasn't his first rodeo. So I think that's what turned it. Sorry, I moved my computer for a second.
No worries. How about the legendary Family Secrets trial? Have you ever experienced a trial like this?
The only other one that came close was the Drew Peterson case. When it was this Family Secrets case was really big. I remember I was so excited because I made it above the fold in the Tribune 2 times on that case. And one of the pictures that was drawn on that case that was on the front page of the Tribune actually made it into the London Times. So I thought it was really cool.
Awesome.
that I made it to the London Times. That picture of me in my opening statement, not that picture. There's another picture of that. And but that's me.
That's a close. No, I'm sorry.
And one thing about that case, it was kind of interesting, was the amount of publicity it got. It got as much publicity as Peterson, maybe not as much worldwide, but here in Chicago, I can still remember one afternoon, they would line up. As you remember, people would have to line up for the courtroom.
Yeah.
And I'm walking back from, I don't know where I was coming from, but there were these 2 girls. One was about 16, the other one was 10 or so. And they said, "Hi, Shark." And I was like, "What?" And I go, "Hi." I go, they're standing in line. I go, "Where's your parents?" And I could tell they had an accent. I go, "Where are you from?" "Oh, we're from Germany."
No
I was
kidding.
like, why are you here? "Oh, we want to come and see The Sopranos in person." I thought that was like, you don't want to go to the Art Institute. You want to come to the federal building and watch a mob trial from Germany. So I guess it was a pretty big thing. And, they were just standing in line till their parents got there. Yeah. And I thought to myself, wow, that's pretty impressive that you have people coming from Europe who happen to be in Chicago, bypassing Wrigley Field or the Art Institute to come over to 219 South Dearborn and watch a little bit of this case.
Boy,
So
they picked a good one.
They did.
Now, Joe, refresh memory. That was, what was it? 14 unsolved murders or 18 unsolved murders going back to the 70s?
I can't remember the total amount. Frank had 13 of them.
And have you ever sat?
6 he didn't get convicted of, I have to say.
That's right. A lot of people forget that.
Yeah. So I won
what-
6 murder cases for one client in one case. So, I mean, I lost the others. I understand that too, but at least I got something out of it for the guy.
I was so surprised. As you remember, there was a lot of talk in the courtroom. Is Joey Lombardo going to testify or not? Right. And then to my surprise, Joey did take the stand in his own defense. What did you think about Joey's testimony?
It started off good. It just didn't go very good on cross. I mean, he, you know, I thought he was going to get up there and say, I was in it at one time, but I'm no longer in it. And I'm not responsible, and I'm repudiating myself. Because remember, he took out that newspaper article saying that he was no longer involved. And then I thought he was going to stick to that script, but for some reason he came off the script. Otherwise, I think if he would have made that argument or taken that position, he might have been found not guilty because they didn't have a lot on him.
I agree. One thing, I mean, I don't want to spend too much time on this. We could spend hours in the family secrets trial, but I want to really quick, when Mrs. Seifert took the stand, right? Very powerful witness for the government. She was very emotional. She was obviously upset. And I had a conversation with Johnny Lira, the boxer. Remember Johnny from Grand Avenue?
Yeah, sure.
If you remember, he was called as a character witness for that trial. But
he was.
Johnny Lira and myself, we felt that Rick Halprin kind of was he took it easy on Mrs. Seifert. Like, he didn't really want to go after her. Like, how the hell do you know it was Joe Lombardo? He was wearing a mask. Would you have went after her a little bit more aggressive, or would you have held back a little bit because she's a victim? A tough one.
I don't hold back. So, I took a lot of heat in the Drew Peterson case when I made that witness cry, and I went after that witness as much as I could. I remember Jeannie Pirro and her little statement about how could you do that to that woman like that? Well, because she's accusing my client of doing something. That's why, and that's my job.
They're fighting for their life, right?
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Funny thing I forgot to tell you, Joe. I remember almost every day at the end of court, Frank Calabrese would unplug your laptop and take the power cord, and I'll never forget seeing him wrap it around his big, massive hands. And it was funny because hours earlier, I heard of, what he would do to certain people, but then to see him wrap your power cord with those hands was pretty intense.
Well, I have to say, we call my son Frank Calabrese sometimes because he's got that grip.
Does he?
Some people are born with that grip.
Yeah.
And he had the grip. He had a super grip. My uncle had the same grip. You grip that guy's hand, it was power in those fingers.
Yeah.
He was a
Strong
very
hands.
powerful man.
What did you think when I mean, a lot of people don't understand or never knew that Frank Sr., he had a defense. He had a story to tell. And correct me if I'm wrong, in Frank's mind, his son and his brother conspired to steal all his money and lock him up for life. And that's exactly what happened. Do you agree with Frank Calabrese's defense?
Well, I would obviously I put the defense on. So what we did learn during the family secrets case, and we found this out, is that Junior took the money, and they went up to the house in Lake Geneva and took the money out of there. Wow. And more importantly, all of Frank's cars disappeared. And Junior took all the cars and sold them. We were able to track one car down, but they didn't know who the seller was. But Frank had a bunch of antique cars, muscle cars. I think he had a Shelby or a Mustang Mach or something. But all of his cars were taken from him. All of his money was taken from him.
Oh boy!
And it was, Frank's idea of what happened was that Junior decided to cooperate because, in Frank's mind, Junior and him had a falling out over Junior and his marriage and his wife. In Frank's mind, that Frank never really was able to really have a good relationship with his wife, with Junior's wife, for whatever reason. I don't know why, but Frank felt that a lot of that came from his son and the wife, And Frank, was very strongly believed that, his son took this money and cooperated so he wouldn't get out and he would never have to face the consequences. And Nick was a tag along because Nick came in at the end. What had happened was, procedurally, what had happened is there were subpoenas. Subpoenas were issued to various people. Nick got a subpoena for X-rays because Junior had told the FBI that Nick got shot during the bungled first attempt to kill Stoop. And
Vaccarata hit.
Vaccarata hit. Yeah,
Okay.
They called him Stoop. That was his nickname. He used to like to hang on the stoop. That during that event, it turned out in the beginning where Nick got shot. So they had the X-rays. They X-rayed his arm and they found fragments or something. I can't remember what it was, but they found evidence that Nick had been shot, just like Junior had said, and they were able to find these gloves that Junior talked about. So they took DNA from Nick too.
Yeah.
And the gloves were a big issue, in the case because he dropped the gloves.
Yes.
And some CPD officer doing what they're supposed to do inventoried them.
Yeah.
And years later, they were still in inventory, even though Twan tried to find them.
Yes.
And had learned that they had been taken. The feds matched the DNA inside that glove that had blood in it with Nick's DNA. At first, Nick did not want to cooperate. Nick, and you read his proffers, he was not up for cooperating.
That's right.
But in the end, he decided to cooperate. And I do believe to this day they let Junior speak to Nick alone. And Nick told Junior all kinds of things that his father had said about Nick to turn him against them. That's kind of how it started. But Nick was very reluctant about testifying. Yeah. Nobody thought he would ever testify until Junior got into his head.
Joe, did you find Nick Calabrese's testimony credible? Did you believe him overall?
Well, I don't really look at it, and that I'm not the jury, so I don't really make a decision as to whether it's credible or not.
Yeah.
But he told a story, and the story seemed to be pretty firm and unshakable.
Yeah.
So I could see the jury believing him.
And one thing I learned about all the trials I've been to, and correct me if I'm wrong, the government does a very good job of corroborating what these witnesses say.
They do.
Right? For the most part. One thing with Nick, and to me, this was one of many highlights at the Family Secrets trial, and I think you'll agree, is when he talked about how the Spilotro brothers were picked up at Venture, brought to the house in Bensonville, and brutally beaten and stomped. Now, a lot of people don't believe Nick Calabrese when they said all the heavyweights were there. Do you believe all those men were there, or do you think he kind of exaggerated his story a little bit? Or
your guess is as good as mine. I have no idea who was there, if any of them were there. I mean, just because Nick said he was there.
Yeah.
And Nick said that Frank wasn't there because Frank was sick or something like that. Otherwise, Frank would have been there as well.
And if you remember this, Joe, Nick Calabrese said, I thought out of the corner of my eye that I seen Rocky and Felice.
I remember him saying that.
And I don't know if it was you or Tom Breen or Ralph. One of the lawyers got up and said, well, wait a minute. Rocky was under surveillance at a different location. So he couldn't have been at two locations at once.
I remember that.
Now, is that reasonable doubt?
Well, it's collateral impeachment. I mean, there is something there to attack his credibility that didn't happen. But if I remember, he kind of wasn't exactly sure it was him or wasn't him.
Yeah.
And that was his kind of way out of it.
Yeah. He did say there was a few men there in that house in Bensonville that he didn't know or he didn't recognize.
He did say that too.
Yeah. How about, this was the second trial I went to. How about this guy, the other Calabrese, not related to Nick and Frank?
Tony?
Tell me about Tony Calabrese.
Tony was a great guy. I really
was he?
Yeah, he was good people with me, especially. I mean, he was loyal to whoever he had to be loyal to. He was a very loyal person. His dad, Cosmo, was a very loyal person, very well-known person, who they claim did a lot of heavy work that nobody really knew about because he was kind of in the shadows. But Tony was Tony was a very, very smart, cunning individual. He was no dummy. He was very, very smart. He was very not only street smart, but he knew a lot of things that most people wouldn't know. He had a little bit of education in him, and he was just he was a decent person. He wasn't. Nobody ever said he did things like they accused Frank of doing with his kids. He was a good family man. He didn't cheat on his wife. He didn't have gumads. He didn't drink. He was just a good person. Whether he was a bad person in other respects is different, but true to the core, he was just a good person. And if he wasn't in that, he would just always have been the type of person, just a good person, a good friend to have.
It's nice to hear the other side of these guys, right? Because the media and people paint these guys as monsters. So it's nice to hear, the good side to some of these guys. Tell me about your, I didn't attend this, but I remember you fought pretty hard for a compassionate release to get him out of jail. Tell me about that really quick.
Well, that was totally possible, but the feds being the feds, I filed this thing when he was down in Indiana, so I filed it in Indianapolis, and it was pending before the judge. And the judge is like telling the government, work something out, do something for this guy, because he didn't have much time to go. Well, the feds were going to agree to release him only if he gave him a proffer, and he wasn't in the mood to give them a deathbed confession about anything. Mm-hmm. So as I was trying to negotiate out of that somehow, unfortunately, the cancer got to him, and he didn't make it out of there.
How old was he when he passed, Joe?
I would say maybe in his early 50s.
Oh, he's young. Okay.
Yeah, I don't remember. I mean, everybody's young compared to me, so.
Now I don't know if it's true or not, but allegedly he was the prime suspect in Ronnie Jarrett, the murder of Ronnie Jarrett, also the Hatch, but he was never charged with those murders, correct?
No.
Okay.
No. As far as Ronnie Jarrett's concerned, I mean, they put him in there and a couple of Satan disciples from Bridgeport too, into that little bit of mix. So they have, different theories about how it occurred. We know why it occurred because Ronnie wouldn't come in and have the meeting that he was supposed to take. We learned that during the family secrets that Ronnie, for some reason, wouldn't come in and sit down and have this sit down. And at some point, I think that they just were so frustrated that's the action that they took in the end. That's kind of what their theory was at the family secrets trial. Not anything that he had done in particular, other than they kept trying to get him to come in for whatever reason it was. And I think to see John Monteleone or somebody.
Yeah.
And he wouldn't comply with the request. And in the end, that kind of happened. But they had Tony. They claimed Tony was part of that. They claimed some of the Satan disciples from Bridgeport were part of that.
Wow.
And as far as this other the Chiramonte thing with Cooper, who was my former client as well.
Okay.
I was representing Cooper in a case at 26th Street, and unbeknownst to me, he was cooperating with the feds. And one day, I get a call from a sheriff in the building. He goes, "Are you still in the building?" I go, "Yeah, why?" He goes, "Your client's up here with some other lawyer and a bunch of FBI agents."
Oh,
and
boy.
I'm like, "What?"
Wow.
So it was in front of Judge Gaughan. I go up to Judge Gaughan's courtroom. The state's attorneys had gotten an ex parte order removing me from the case to let this other guy file his appearance. And then they told me, "Well, you're no longer his attorney." And I said, "I want to hear it from him." So I said, "I'm not listening to the FBI agent." And I can't remember the name of this agent, but he was standing out the door. I came up the staircases. I came from the Judge Gaughan, I think it was on 6. I came from 4 or something.
At the county building?
Yeah, the county building. I come up the staircase, and there's this FBI agent And I'm like, he's staring down. You can't go in there. I go, get the fuck out of my way. I can't go in there. This ain't 219 South Dearborn. So now I go in, and there's this. So the judge stops the proceeding. It was like he was pleading guilty to the murder. And I go, what are you doing, dude? Well, I got to do this. I'm pleading guilty. They gave me 20 years. I go, there's no evidence. Why are you doing this to yourself? This is what I'm going to do. Okay. Well, there's not anything I can do about it.
Wow.
But, you know, I caught the feds with their pants down at the time. And if it wasn't for my friend who was a Cook County sheriff who knew that I represented this guy, it would have all, you know, happened without me knowing anything about it.
Yeah.
Because, you know, going and getting an ex parte order from the chief judge removing your attorney, to me, I was pretty pissed off about that. And so was Judge Gahn. And Judge Gahn made it known to the state's attorney what a shitty thing that was to do, not to give me notice. And I said, well, then he would have told everybody. And Judge Gahn goes, you don't know that. You don't know that.
By
Because
law,
I
do
would
they
have told
have
him
to
not
give you a heads up, or is it more of a courtesy?
What's that?
By law, do they have to give you a heads up and notify you, or is it more of a courtesy thing?
No, they're supposed to notify me. I'm the attorney of record.
Yeah.
They're supposed to notify me.
Now,
And Cooper told him what he told him. I mean, and nothing happened because, you know, they only had Cooper's testimony. They didn't have anything else. And unfortunately for Cooper, he wound up pleading guilty to a murder they couldn't prove.
unbelievable. And didn't he wear a wire on Tony?
No,
No, I thought he
No.
did.
no,
Okay.
no, because he was locked up.
I want to
Remember,
talk about.
I think he was in custody.
Okay, I want to talk about one of my old friends who was a very good friend of yours. I sat next to him every day in court. I couldn't find a photo of him. I want to talk really quick. What was
Shorty?
Rocky and Shorty like? Because I remember Shorty, they talked about quite a bit at the Family Secret Shop. Tell me a couple stories about Shorty, Lamati, and Rocky, if you don't mind.
Shorty was great. I love talking to Shorty. He was funny as could be. I would go over to his house and have coffee with him all the time and listen to him and Bertha yelling at each other. I mean, he was a hilarious guy. But, you know, I always tell this one story about when he was going to be visited by the pretrial services department to write up the probation office to write up the pre-sentence report for the case that he had pending. We're sitting there having coffee, and Jimmy I's sitting there, and I'm sitting there, and Rocky's sitting there. He's like, "Hey, Sharp, what am I supposed to tell this woman when she comes over? She's going to ask me, what do I do for a living?" I said, "I don't know, Short." And Jimmy I right goes, "Tell them you work for the outfit. They already know that." And we all started laughing. It was hilarious. But I liked Shorty a lot. I mean, I went to his going away party. I mean, he was a good guy. Rocky was a client and a friend for a number of years. I knew Rocky before I was a lawyer.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Yeah, and I represented Rocky on a bunch of cases, grand jury cases at 26th Street. I did his last case that he had, that he got the jewelry store case.
Yeah.
And a couple of the other cases that he had. I beat a bunch of cases for the kid. Rocky was wild. The kid was wild. He was just wild. I have to say, the kid is just wild.
Yeah. And if you remember, he was a big hockey fan, right? Like a very, very knowledgeable when it comes to hockey. He could have been a coach.
He could have been a pro player. I do believe because, you know, Rocky, this is no secret. Everybody knows he was a heroin addict. But when he went to Russia, he was sent to Russia to play hockey. And that's where he first got hooked on heroin. And,
wow.
You know, he battled addiction for decades. You know, we thought he had it beat. And then he died, and, you know, it kind of took everybody by surprise because he had gotten out of, he'd been locked up for about 24 months, and he came home and he seemed to be really getting his shit together.
Yeah.
And, you know, all of a sudden he just, that one dose just killed him. He died on his bathroom floor in his house. It was just awful.
Man. I mean, what a shame. What a shame. Last time I seen Rocky, I'll never forget it. I was quite surprised to see him. I just accidentally bumped into him at the Taylor Street Fest. He lost weight. He was tanned, and he was showing me photos of him hoisting the Stanley Cup with the Blackhawks.
Yeah.
I'm like, Rocky, you just get out of jail and you're hoisting the cup.
Yeah,
he
he
was
was.
great.
Well, he was involved in local hockey. He was always at Johnny's Ice House. I mean, he was around. He coached kids. He did. Rocky. If you took the damn addiction away from him, Rocky would still be around. But the addiction he just couldn't stop. I mean, like I said, everybody thought that he finally had it beat because he was straight for a long period of time.
What a shame, right? It's ruined so many lives. I wanna talk about, if you don't mind, some of your mentors, right? Guys like this, like Eddie Jensen.
That's my guy.
I seen Eddie Jensen a few times. I'll never forget when he represented Frank Caruso Jr. at the Cook County Courts building. He was in a wheelchair at the time, zipping around court, but I've heard nothing but wonderful things about the younger Ed Jensen. Tell me about what he was like.
Well, Eddie was great. In fact, I had the co-defendant in that case, and my client got probation on that case. I had Victor Jasis, who was my client on that case. And
Okay.
and I remember the day it happened well, because Rocky called me and said something happened, and Victor and Tommy are locked up, and we need you to go to 51st and Wentworth. It's like 9:00 on a Saturday morning. I'm like, okay, let me get my shit together and let me go over there. So now I get there at 51st and Wentworth. I'm up on the second floor, and I see guys walking around with suits, and I'm like, oh shit, what's going on? Well, they're from the 5th floor, meaning they're from the mayor's office. And before I had gone over there, Jensen had called me and said, I heard you going, check it out. Let me know what's going on over there, right? And I said, okay, because he had Toots's kid. So I got there and I saw what was going on. And I remember calling Eddie. And I said, Eddie, you better get down here. I said, the mayor's office is here. Nobody's telling us anything. There was a fight. Well, why are these guys here? Why is this big production all of a sudden over here at this area where I'm seeing people who are not police officers in walking around talking to detectives, right? And they didn't tell us at all at this point. I mean, we're talking like Eddie got there around 2:00, and I was still, I was still around. Eddie comes around they're still not telling us, the magnitude of what's going on. We don't learn till around 3, 4 o'clock, that this was some kind of racial hate crime, and it was about to explode nationwide. This case was so big that Clinton talked about it. President Clinton talked about it in his Friday statement on Good Friday. Because I remember that particular day, I had to go with Victor's dad to downtown to NBC to appear on the Today Show with Matt and Katie Couric. And later on in that afternoon, Clinton had mentioned, this racial crime that had happened in Chicago.
Yeah, hate crime.
It was, it was a huge, huge case.
Yeah. I will. I'll never ever forget during.
But Eddie was great. Eddie and I were friends for a long time. Eddie didn't teach me how to practice law. He didn't.
What did you learn from him?
How to be a lawyer. Big difference. Eddie didn't say you got to cross-examine the guy this way. He knew I knew what I was doing. He taught me skills. One of the, and then another one of my mentors was Lou Carbonaro. Do you know who he was?
No, I don't. No.
Lou was Angelo's lawyer for decades.
Angelo, and, this guy?
Yep.
Oh boy. Okay.
Yep. I met Lou when right out of law school. And I'll tell you how I met Lou. I was a lawyer for about 6 months, and I got a call on a murder case, and the co-defendant was Mario Rainoni's brother.
Oh boy. Okay.
And it was a murder of a 2-2 boy by the 12th Street Players, and Louis and Gus Louis Rainoni was charged with the murder along with my client Gus Budge Dude. And Gus is a big board member in the Outlaw Motorcycle Gang now, I understand.
No kidding.
But I haven't seen him in a while. But Lou was the attorney for Louis Rainoni. And Lou and I just hit it off right away. So the next thing I know, I'm with Lou a lot. And there's another guy, he gave me a couple of cases, but mostly it was things that he taught me, lessons to learn about, the practice of law. And, Lou's big thing was the only way you can survive in this business is you have to do the work and you can't lie to your clients. That's one of the big things he always told me. And, Eddie's thing was you always have to talk to your clients. If they call you, you got to call them back.
Communication.
Communication, which a lot of lawyers don't abide by. But whenever I would go see Eddie, he always had clients in his office, just like me. I have a client or two in my office every single day, 5 days a week. I got clients coming this afternoon. You got to talk to your clients, and you have to service these people. These people are desperate. These people are looking at all kinds of different consequences because of what's happening in their case or their loved one's case. And I can tell you one thing, though, about Lou. I did get to sit in on a meeting with all of the top bosses in the city of Chicago and their attorneys when they were getting ready to do the Kansas City skim case.
Oh, boy. You mean Ayupa, Jack Cerrone, those guys?
They were all in the same room with me. And I was
unbelievable.
I was a young lawyer. Sandy Volpe was there. So Sandy already had known me. And these were powerful figures.
What kind of mood were they in at this time?
Well, it was a meeting of all the attorneys. All the attorneys were there for all the defendants, and we had it in his conference room at Lou's building. He used to be over at the Bell Federal building on the corner of Monroe and Clark. And I'm just a young lawyer. I mean, this is probably 1986, 85. I can't remember when it was, but it was when that case was starting. To walk in there and be around, some of the most powerful attorneys in the city, and some of the most powerful men in the city at the time, was pretty exciting for a young attorney at the time.
Yeah.
And I'm fortunate to have experienced that, to sit in a room with names like you just mentioned.
Yeah. How about this gentleman? I was able to see him several times in court. I always find him very entertaining. Last time I seen him, sadly, he represented Joe Lombardo, and then sadly he passed away after that. But tell me a little bit about Mr. Halprin.
So I had met Rick. I met Rick a long time ago when we were on a committee together, the Illinois Criminal Justice Committee of the Illinois State Bar. And I was asked as a very young lawyer to be on this committee. And it was very prestigious to be on this committee. And there were all these attorneys that for decades were on this committee. And I was kind of like the new guy. And Rick kind of took a liking to me. And Rick was a very arrogant guy.
Was he?
Right?
No.
He didn't, he wasn't friendly with a lot of people. He would talk to people, but he liked me. We would go to hockey games together, go out to dinner together. So, we were friends until his death.
Wasn't he a hockey player? NHL
He was
player?
a hockey player.
Yeah.
He was definitely a hockey player.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. He played hockey. He was from Canada. He played hockey. We had a lot of conversations together. We had a lot of dinners together. We went to a lot of Blackhawk games together. And we were friends, and we had tried some cases together. He was very close with Tom Durkin, who unfortunately passed last year. Him and Rick were very tight.
Yeah.
They were like good, really, really good friends. And Rick was a phenomenal attorney. He used to work for, I forget the name of the attorney he worked for, but he worked for another attorney in Chicago.
Sheldon?
No, I can't remember. Somebody from the 50s and 60s. I can't remember his name offhand, but he was a well-known mob attorney, so to speak. And that's who Rick worked with. So, Rick had some of the clientele from him. Yeah. But, Rick was good people. I liked Rick a lot.
Yeah.
A lot.
God bless him and his
family.
He
was smart, too. I mean, the guy was sharp as he was very smart, very witty, very smart thinker. I mean, we got along great.
Switch gears real quick. Tell me about back in the days, going to Rush Street, right? Faces, Jilly's, Eddie Rockets. What were some of the places you and the wise guys used to hang out at if you were back in the day?
Well, we always start at the Tavern and Rush. We wind up and sometimes we'd go to Faces, or other times we go to Jilly's, which is most of the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
it's not the same there anymore, though, is it?
No, that was the 90s. I remember there used to be a lawyer in Chicago. My name is Stuart Goldberg, who was very popular name. And Stuart, Stuart was a Rush Street guy, and unfortunately, he had the Rolls Royce at the end and everything. He was very flashy, very flamboyant type of guy. And it used to bother him that I was able to park on Rush Street with my flashers on all night because I knew all the coppers. He's like, I go down there, how do you park down there with your flashers on and nobody gives you a ticket? I said, well, I know all the security guys down there. So those were fun days. I mean, we had a lot of laughs and a lot of, just a lot of things. None of it ever discussed about anything inappropriate. I was never made part of anything. They were just friends. We talked about all kinds of things, but not about their thing. Right?
I remember you said you guys never discussed business at dinner.
No, I didn't know any. I never. Yeah. And even pending cases, we didn't talk about pending cases. Yeah. How's Tony's case or how's none of that ever came up either.
Yeah. Joe, I got to ask, I've heard, thank God I've never been here, but I've heard this place is a hellhole. Tell me what it was like visiting a client in the notorious MCC prison. How bad, how nasty is this place?
It's not, it's better than 26th in California, I'll tell you that. So it's you go and you sit in a room, 5x7 room with your client. And they lock you in there, and then when you're done, they unlock you.
Jesus. Yeah. Remember when they broke out of the MCC?
I do.
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah.
I do.
Tell me, Joe, I always got to ask, in my opinion, Joe, as a court buff, I felt back in the 90s, we had some of the best prosecutors in the country, guys like Mitch Mars, Scully, Marcus Funk. What was your experience going up against the cream of the crop, if you will?
Well, they were always, they were very good lawyers, especially Scully. Scully wound up being a judge out in Lake County after he left the U.S. Attorney's office. Poor Mitch, he died when he was young. I mean, these were tenacious, well-organized prosecutors. I mean, they were very smart and they knew how to put on their cases. Yeah. And they were, like you said, they were the creme de la creme. The only one really left in the office is Bill Hogan. And I just read that Billy had he took over the Bridgeview 6 case, and he's already looking into dismissing some of the evidence because he's not going to put on a case he loses. So I anticipate that Bridgeport 6 case with the ICE is probably going to disappear because it is, from what I've read, not a very good case for them. But those were tenacious, well-trained prosecutors. And they didn't
what I loved about those guys is they schooled, they trained, they taught a lot of the younger prosecutors. So a lot of the young kids coming from college learned from Marcus Funk, Scully, Mitch Mars.
Yeah, well, Funk learned too. I mean, Funk hadn't been in the office that long. He came up rather quickly too because he had good mentors within the office. And Mitch was there for a long time. I mean, I had other cases with Mitch, years past. Scully too. I had other cases with Scully as well, smaller, minor cases. But I never found them to be like liars or frame artists, or they kind of just did their job with whatever they had. And that was it. They didn't take it personal either.
No. This is pretty important here. I want you to talk about, your client gets convicted and it's not over. What do you do to bring them home? Like to get them released out of prison? I know that's a big part of your practice. Tell me about that a little bit. When a guy gets convicted, what you do to try to get him to come home?
Well, you do your appeal. I mean, that's all you can really do. You set it up in case you lose, and you make appellate issues. I mean, the basic example of that is the USA versus Messino case with Dickey and Clemmy Messino, their cocaine case. Dickey got convicted, Clemmy got convicted, and they got life. And
life.
12 years later, I got him out. It took me 12 years to get Dickey home. So we didn't stop. So it just depends on the case. But, there are avenues, sometimes you reach a dead end, and sometimes you don't. But the most important thing is you go down the road until you can't go any further.
Yeah. And Joe, I'm guessing when you're working with a client, I'm guessing you build a relationship with their family, right? Or do you kind of not get involved with the family?
It just, it depends on the client. Some clients, the families are involved. Others, the family's never involved. It just depends, on the client. And I can say that, some families are really hands-on, others are not.
Joe, how about one of my favorite shows, Chicago Fire and Chicago PD? Can you talk about your experience with Chicago PD? What was that like? Because I love both of these shows.
Well, Chicago PD was, I came on to Chicago PD. I was called in. I was asked to meet with a couple of the writers, and we went out. We had dinner. This was, I think, in season 1 or season 2. I can't remember because I worked for 3 seasons there. But I was brought in, and I was basically brought in as a technical consultant on one episode, and it involved a little bit of changing some scenes and suggesting edits and rewrites. And next thing I know, I'm working with the writers, and I worked with the writers for a number of years, on the scripts, doing certain things, the legal end of the scripts and stuff like that. It was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun working on the show. It was kind of boring at times because you'd sit there for 12 hours and, watch.
Yeah, how did you find time for that?
It was very difficult. I was going to 26th Street and then running back over to Cinespace and, and sending other people to do stuff. It came to the point where I just couldn't do both. So, I couldn't do both. I did 3 guest appearances. My 3rd appearance got, got cut out. So I only had my 2 appearances, but I did get my 2 appearances in my roles. I got my SAG card, which I always wanted a SAG card.
Nice.
As a kid. I did get my SAG card out of it, but working on the show, was a lot of fun. Working with Dick Wolf was a lot of fun. Dick Wolf's a very interesting person. And I spent a lot of time with him behind the cameras when he would come in and we'd sit and talk. And he had he had a liking to me because he said I reminded him of his wife's father, his father-in-law, who was a drug lawyer in Detroit and did drug cases in Detroit in the 60s and 70s. And he was known for that. So Dick kind of, we shared that little bit together. And it was always interesting talking to Dick. Dick was, just a great guy.
That reminds me, Joe, I wanted to ask you, now you've represented clients all over the country, correct? Not just Chicago. And what is that like? Is it very similar to trying a case in Chicago, or is it totally different? Because I kind of picture you kind of like my cousin Vinny, showing up in some hillbilly town, dressed the way you like to dress. What is it like representing clients?
I've done that numerous times. I remember, when in the beginning, when the cartel, when the cocaine explosion happened, the cartel's basically based out of Chicago at the time. And I would be sent to all these different places where people were arrested, mostly, highway stops, right? With loads. And, I would go to strange places, Alabama, Mississippi, Texas, Nevada, California, New York, Rhode Island. I mean, I've been all around, federal and state courthouses. But every district is different. I did my last out of town case was in Corpus Christi. It was a big drug case, and it was in a federal building. And the jury came back with a not guilty in 30 minutes. The judge almost fell off her chair.
No kidding. It's unheard of. Wow.
Yeah, but they left me so much to work with. I had a field day down there, and I was able to do that. But I always bring in a local lawyer to help me, because if this juror says he lives in Farmingdale Heights, I don't know what the hell that means, right?
They know the law of the
land. If somebody says in Chicago, I live in Northbrook or I live in Elmhurst, I get an idea of the type of person they are, right?
Yeah. Now, Joe, you mentioned that you mentioned a lot of your cases are dope cases, are drug cases. Is the flow of drugs coming into our country, is it getting worse or is it getting better? I mean,
listen, the price of cocaine is down to $12,000. There's so much of it on the streets. I don't know what Trump is right. He did bring down the prices of drugs. And he sure
And
did.
how about the cartels, right? I mean, to me, this is the real enemy here, these cartels and what's going on in crisis. Do you see any resolution to this major problem we have? Or is it just going to continue on?
It's as long as Americans want drugs, someone's going to sell it to them. The problem is, and this is, I don't want to sit here be on a soapbox, but George Bush Sr. was one of the first ones to really recognize this. In order to stop the flow of drugs, you got to reduce the demand, and it doesn't work that way. They just keep going after the suppliers. Meanwhile, the users are finding other suppliers, right?
Oh boy.
So the problem with the drugs in America is Americans want drugs. And as long as there's a demand for drugs, somebody's going to give them the drugs that they want. Remember, drugs were legal in the United States till 1914. People were able to buy cocaine and heroin and all this other stuff. In 1914, when they passed a law outlawing all these substances, the black market took, and it's been like that ever since. So you're never going to stop the flow of drugs until you get rid of the users. And it seems like it's a paradoxical argument, right? It's a circular argument. You're going around in circles with it. But drug demand is, they said opioid prescriptions are down. I watched this stuff.
Oh, good.
And opioid prescriptions are down. And what happens is with people, on opioid prescriptions, is they get hooked on the opioids and the doctor cuts them off. Now they got to get on the street to buy them.
Oh boy.
So, there's people that are out there that's they have to buy drugs on the street because they can't no longer get them from their doctors. So this opioid crisis was really kind of started with the pharmaceutical companies that and doctors that were dispensing these things like they were vitamin C.
Yeah. Joe, in closing, I want to ask you a few questions before we go. I know you got to go. You got a lot going on. I'm curious. Did your mom and dad ever see you in court? Did they ever see you in action?
My mom did.
Did she?
Oh, she was at family.
Like at a real trial
every day.
Was she?
Yeah. Well, she worked at the county, so she would just walk over, and my mom worked for the assessor's office, so she would just show up and watch. But my dad saw me in action when I represented him on a case that I won.
Joe, I want to ask you.
It was a gun case too. My dad had a gun. My dad liked guns, so.
Nothing, it reminds me of when Alex Salerno represented his father, Bobby Salerno, right?
Yeah, Alex was a good friend of mine. Alex and I were.
I was going to ask you about Alex.
Partners. Yep.
What a shame, right? Another life cut so short.
I was so heartbroken when he died, and I remember I was out of town. I couldn't go to the memorial or anything. It broke my heart.
Yeah. Joe, what advice would you give young kids, high school, college? What advice would you give them in this new modern world we live in? Would you say go to school, learn a trade?
Well, not to believe anything you read on the internet. We'll start with that. How about that? Number one. And I have a 17-year-old son, so he's got he goes to Mount Carmel High School, so he's got a pretty good head on his shoulders. The school really, teaches these boys the right from the wrong. But there's a lot of young kids that don't need to go to college, and they're not going to college as much as they used to because college enrollment is down.
Is it? Is it down?
It's down. U of I is way down, and
no kidding.
Yeah, and a lot of colleges they're down. People are finding alternative careers. Unfortunately, now it looks like the trade industry is going to open up because of all the illegal aliens that were involved in construction that have been deported from this country. So I've been reading about this one contractor. I was reading about him down in Texas. He couldn't find anybody to work on laying foundations, and he was looking, at trade schools to try to figure out, to try to get kids to be interested in a trade. The most important thing when you get out of school, you got to figure out what you want to do. Do you want to be you want to be a drug dealer? Do you want to be a lawyer? Do you want to be a construction worker? Do you want to go to beauty school? There's a lot of opportunities for kids out there, but the most important thing is you got to finish high school. You finish high school and then make your decision, but you got to finish high school.
Yeah. Joe, is there hope for the city of Chicago? Is there hope for our country, for my daughter, your son's generation? Do you think there's hope?
I always think there's hope. I don't think there's anything wrong, to be honest with you. So I don't. I'm not a doom and gloomer. I'm happy
Good.
about America. I'm happy. I'm happy with our country. I don't care. I mean, I might not be happy with the current regime, but doesn't mean I'm unhappy with the country. This is a great country. No one's going to destroy it. And the city of Chicago is going to survive. This mayor's on his way out.
That's good.
This mayor, he can't do anything. He's being bootstrapped by city council. I worked on Jane Byrne's campaign when Jane Byrne ran, and I remember, I was working for the first ward, and then my friend asked me to go over there, and I was like, I'm in the first ward. I told old man Diarco I thought he was going to have a fucking heart attack, and I was like, I want to try, I'm going to do it, and I did it. I took a lot of heat in my neighborhood for it, but after it was over, everybody came to us. So, and that's funny. Yeah, I mean, Jane Byrne, the other day was her anniversary of the day she beat Belandic. But, you're not going to see strong mayors like that anymore, I don't think.
Why, Joe? Why?
Because of city council. I mean, city council is pretty powerful now. There's more in city council, and city council is actually able to control the mayor. Now, whoever the next mayor may be, I don't know. I don't believe that it's going to be the current mayor that we have, only because he can't really get anything done. He's alienated the people in city council, and city council is where everything is made. And it used to be that the mayor controlled city council, but it's not like that anymore. City council is broken into different factions. You got progressive Democrats, South Side Democrats, West Side Democrats. What a lot of people don't realize, these wards, even though you might be ethnically the same, you have divergent interests in the city. South Side might not want to vote with the West Side. They're all looking at their own little wards and their own little fiefdoms. And the way the city is now is we do have the city council we do have some strong people in city council, and whoever the next mayor is going to be is going to have to deal with city council and try to get the majority of the city council to back whatever policies that they want to enact. And it's going to be a very interesting election. The last two mayors we've had, unfortunately, you haven't been that dynamic, like Rahm Emanuel or Mayor Daley, right? So, I think that the days of seeing those type of mayors is long gone because of the power of city council. So the next mayor is going to have to deal with, city council, like a president has to deal with Congress. It's the same type of thing. Never used to be that way. What the mayor said was the law, but it's different now.
Joe, would you be interested in maybe doing a follow-up story, or maybe we could talk about the first ward?
Yeah, sure.
Guys like Pat Marcy. I went to Alderman Fred Rohde's trial, and I also want to talk about at a later date, what you think of guys like Bob Cooley or BJ Jehoda.
Yeah.
I want to get your opinion on those guys.
Yeah.
Could we maybe do a second set of
just let me know.
Okay.
Not a problem.
I want to thank you, Joe, for everything.
Not a problem.
And when you have time, maybe we can get together and go hit one of our favorite restaurants.
Yeah, just let me know when you put this up so I can send the link. I put the link on Facebook from my Facebook